Hey pre-meds, and welcome to this final video on analyzing the PsychSoc section of the new AAMC practice exam that was released in October. So this final section, much like the rest of the test, did feel typical compared to the other AAMC materials, particularly the section bank and exams 3 and 4, although 4 was a little different than 3 and this exam. So I would say it's closest to 3 in the section bank. Like many PsychSoc sections, only 3 of the passages contained visual elements like figures and graphs. The other 7 were entirely text-based, although they still did involve studies and data that were required to answer questions. And even those text-only passages did sometimes include figures in the question stem or as part of the 4 answer choices. So there was definitely research design even in those text-only passages. From a content perspective, there was the typical breakdown. They kind of picked and chose from all the different sections. 7A was heavily represented with 10 questions, and sociology did have about 18 questions between 8C and 10A topics. 8C, 9AB, and 10A topics in sociology. So there were that typical breakdown. It was very similar. I checked it compared to the other exams, felt very representative. One thing I will notice is there were those typical questions about discrimination, prejudice, bias, operant versus classical conditioning. However, in the 7A category, there were a lot more detailed questions about drugs in terms of types of drugs and their mechanisms of actions. And I found myself noticing more questions about things like attachment styles and personality theories that were a little bit more in-depth than other exams. However, like with many PsychSoc sections, many students call it CARS 2.0, the majority of the time I found myself doing what I call putting my passage blinders on, which is that I had to remember that if the question was asking according to the passage or based on study 1, that I could only use information based on the passage and not just go off my gut instinct based on terms that I knew. So a lot of these questions, even though the words themselves were relatively high yield, you really needed the passage information to pick the right answer from the 4. Once in a while, and this is true I think of every PsychSoc section, there were words that even I didn't know, and I teach this all day, every day. I teach this exam. And as typical, when there are words you don't know, I have 2 strategies for that. These are 2 of the strategies I teach in my course. 1, if you see a word you don't know, but you know the other 3, and those other 3 are all wrong, you're like, definitely not those other 3, then pick the one you don't know. But if you're getting to a question, there's a word you don't know, and you do know the other 3, and one of those other 3 feels like the right answer, it fits really well, pick that one. All right, don't pick the unknown word unless you're pretty sure the other 3 words are wrong. What I did notice is that when there were words that I wasn't familiar with, they were pretty low yield, don't come up a lot on the materials. The other 3 answer choices were very high yield topics. So they were words that I was very familiar with, terms that I knew very well, that come up often in practice materials. So I think they did that on purpose, right? Where they throw in something new, and the expectation is you understand the other 3 answers, and it's okay if you don't know the 4th. That's a test-taking strategy. It's a critical reasoning strategy that they directly test, particularly in the PsychSoc section. Finally, PsychSoc has a unique set of study, design, research questions. They tend to have more of Skill 3 and Skill 4 questions than any other section. That was true here as well. They asked a lot of questions about confounders, controls for studies, different types of studies like cross-sectional versus experimental. They asked about independent and dependent variables directly, sometimes in the standalone question. So making sure that you're brushed up on your research design terminology and your basic data analysis will of course help in the PsychSoc section. Thank you guys so much. If you're interested in learning all of these skills and practicing and getting ready for an exam like this, I am running a group course from December 19th to January 19th to prepare for the upcoming 2023 test dates. You can find the link in the video below to sign up. And if you have any questions, throw them in the comments. Please click subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video series, and happy studying.